Hello, everybody. We're really excited to have you here today at what we hope is the first of many Salty Stream presentations. Now, I'm really excited to be able to talk to everyone today. I'm always excited to be able to talk to everyone, but we wanted to start this off. We wanted to kick off these Salty Streams with an overview of the SALT project, where we were, where we are, and where we are going. Now, one of the things that a lot of people probably are unaware of is just how incredibly popular salt actually is. So, the SALT project has grown significantly in the last few years. We're going to talk a little bit about where this came from and where a lot of this growth has come from and why we're so excited about this. A lot of people don't realize, but in a recent report, it was shown that salt is used by over 22% of organizations worldwide, which is huge. We also found out that salt is categorized by PyPI, the Python Package Index, as a critical package, meaning that it is in the top 1% of all downloads of all Python software out there. This was also backed up by a meta-analysis where Google determined that Python or that Salt was one of the most critical Python projects in the world today. We've recently had a little bit of mud slung at us by a competitor named Ansible. And I usually don't talk about this publicly, but I felt that it was necessary. Ansible has done this to us a lot over the years, and they've claimed that we're dead or that we're declining. Nothing could be further from the truth. We have made significant strides in adding support for more interfaces and operating systems inside of Salt. Development marches ahead smoothly. Releases are coming out on time, and we're very, very excited about the overall growth. And so the tales of our death are greatly exaggerated. Salt is more than alive and well. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about Salt and where we've been in the past few years. So the Salt project started in February of 2011. And that is when I started working on Salt in my basement and putting the original code together. The first commit, you can go back in the commit history and see it there in February of 2011. And then Salt Stack, the company, was founded in 2012. And we started working on enterprise software, raising money, and doing all of those startup things. One of the things that was really exciting, especially about the early years of Salt, was that when we were only a few months old, we started to be used by very large organizations. A number of large social media platforms, as well as large universities, had started to utilize Salt for its remote execution backplane in June of 2011, which is astonishing to me that Salt itself could be seen as so useful despite the fact that it was so incredibly young. It was very exciting for us to put the company together and start working on ways to make money with what was quickly becoming an extremely popular open source platform. But then, as the years went on, something fantastic happened. We were approached by VMware for our acquisition. Now we've been talking to VMware and had worked with VMware for a few years, but when they came to us in 2020 and we were looking at acquisition, it was really interesting to analyze and interpret what was going on. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. But after the VMware acquisition of SaltStack, I'm very excited to say that we've been very heavily integrated into not only vRealize automation and a number of other products, but that we continue to get deeper and deeper into VMware. This is something that Nick, who is with me, is going to talk about a little later in the presentation how we have become an integral part of not just the core components that were part of the original motivation for bringing Salt into VMware, but also into more and more of VMware's overall software stack. And so I'm also excited about being able to talk about how Salt, our enterprise offering, is now automation config inside of what is now VMware ARIA. Now, you can keep up with us in a lot of different places. You can go to the Salt Project YouTube channel. You can follow us on GitHub. We've got the Salt Project community Slack, as well as Reddit and LinkedIn. We've got Twitter, which has a strange new logo that we're all still getting used to, as well as, of course, Facebook and Instagram. One of the other things I want to point out is a podcast called The Hacks. The Hacks is a podcast with myself and Jimmy Chunga. Comes out every Tuesday. We've got over 200 episodes now where we talk about tech, what's happening in the world, and how that applies to technology, cybersecurity, and a number of other topics. We've been really excited to continue to see the listens of the Hacks podcast grow. Well, now that I've talked to you a little bit about what we're doing and where we are, let me introduce ourselves. My name is Tom Hatch. I am the creator of Salt Project and the founder of SaltStack. I am also the creator and founder of a project called Item, which has been picking up more and more steam as we've been building it out inside of VMware, and a project that we're very, very excited about. Now, before starting Salt and SaltStack and the Salt Project back in 2011, I worked as the principal architect for a streaming music startup. And before that, I worked in the US intelligence community. And so my background in infrastructure, automation, and management stretches out a ways. I'd also like to introduce Nick Arone. Nick Arone is our senior product manager, who is the product manager over Salt Project. He's been an invaluable asset to us over the last few years and made huge strides in getting us deeper and deeper into VMware. And as we saw on that first slide, Nick has been one of the many people who have helped us in that massive growth. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself at all?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So as Tom said, Nicholas Arone. I'm Senior Manager of Product Management here in the Automation Business Unit of VMware. I've been in the software industry and other related verticals for over the last 20 years. A lot of it's been focused in on automation infrastructure. And a lot of my focus over my time here at VMware has been focused in on as part of the acquisition, bringing Salt in and having it adopted far and wide to enable the versatility of the VMware products to scale and be more client consumable. And we are well on that way, and I will hit on that a little bit later in my section, but really thrilled to have everyone here, whether it be live or in the rewind. So I'll give it back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Nick. So I wanted to take a minute and kind of cycle back and talk about why I chose to create Salt and talk about some of those core motives that I had and still have with the Salt project as it continues to march forward. Now, when I started working on Salt in 2011, granted, it's been a few years, I had spent a lot of time doing infrastructure management. As I mentioned just a few moments before, I was the architect at a streaming music startup. Before that, I had built automation platforms for the US intelligence community. And before that, I'd worked with a number of companies through the years doing infrastructure management as well as infrastructure automation. And I had built a number of automation platforms over the years, either cobbled together different pieces of software or built my own components. And when I started working on SALT, I recognized that infrastructure management as a whole was a little different from what a lot of the overall philosophies that were out there were. And the salty approach that I decided to take, again, was somewhat divergent. Generally speaking, when we think about infrastructure automation, we think about it through the lens of being able to define or declare how a infrastructure or an operating system is going to be set up. Now, that approach is extremely useful and core to how SALT works. But no matter what, when I went back and looked at this approach, I found holes. I wanted to be able to create a platform that wouldn't run out of steam, so to speak. I wanted to create a platform that wasn't overly restricted by a single philosophical approach. And so inside of SALT, I started by building a remote execution and modular platform first. The idea was to be able to send a command out to a logically infinite number of systems and almost instantly get information back live from all of these systems. A lot of my original thinking was along the lines of overcoming challenges that I had run into so many times with configuration management databases, having stale information, cloud automation platforms having stale information about their infrastructures. And again, I just wanted to be able to ask my infrastructure a question. The benefit that I ran into was that that core platform that I built around asking the infrastructure questions proved to be modular enough to be able to have more capabilities. And so after that core component was built, I went back and built the configuration management component, or SALT states. And once I had SALT states in place, I realized that I needed events. And this helped me grow into a philosophy about infrastructure management. As SALT grew, and I worked very closely with a lot of our users, it became very clear what we needed to do to be able to facilitate the requirements and needs of so many different infrastructures. Being able to work with so many infrastructures of such significant scale on a regular basis, again, gave us an incredible insight into how to develop our infrastructure platform so that it wasn't limited merely to setting up and deploying instances, but being able to have a complete day zero, day one, and day two approach to overall management. And so that is why SALT has a philosophy around being able to enforce the state of an infrastructure in an idempotent way, but also can reach out to query and change anything in a large infrastructure, as well as receive events that are being generated from that infrastructure and react to them. That again gave us a maximum amount of flexibility. And also to do that, we knew that scale was deeply important. And to accomplish the scale and performance that were necessary, we had to build everything from the ground up, day zero, to be able to scale. And this is why I was so surprised that even in 2011, when SALT was only a few months old, it was already managing infrastructures in the tens of thousands of systems. And so it's no wonder that we have now been able to manage infrastructures in the hundreds of thousands of systems. And in some cases, we have even pushed into 1 million managed nodes, which again has been an extremely exciting thing for SALT. And so why did I make SALT? I needed an infrastructure platform that could do things that nothing else could. And I'm very proud to say that SALT is still that platform that can manage infrastructure and do things that nothing else can, which again is why it's been so important to VMware. So there's the core motivation around building SALT and SALT project. But what does it look like when we take an open source project and turn it into a company? everything changes when you raise money, and everything changes when you have to become profitable. This has been something that has also been a big deal in open source quite recently. That is, it's a bit of an elephant in the room. So the project is open source and released under the Apache license, which is a very permissive open source license. And so for many years inside of SaltStack, it was a bit of a challenge to try and determine how to best make money with open source software. And so I developed a strategy which we refer to as the Trinity of open source, where we understand that the community who uses open source software is not the customer, and that we need to unify the customer goals, the community goals, around a high level objective. And in doing so, we created SaltStack Enterprise, which again is now ARIA config, and we created SaltStack SecOps, which is now secure hosts. The thing that I realized was that if we wanted to maintain a completely open core community, and we wanted to maintain the innovation and the power and the capabilities that come from having an open community, we also needed to understand how to create software which we could sell to a customer who is separate and apart from that community. I've given a number of presentations on the Trinity of open source. I would encourage everyone to look them up. And we will almost certainly do a Salty stream in the future on the Trinity of open source. It's a very important core concept to SaltStack, as well as how we are monetizing Salt inside of VMware to make it stay free and stay open into the future.
Tom, I would encourage everyone, there is a previous episode that you did on the hacks actually that covers the Trinity of open source, which is a great listen.
Yeah, so actually let me cover those really quickly. We've done a couple of episodes on the hacks on the Trinity of open source. There's one called the Trinity of open source. You can go and search for it. And I gave a couple of presentations on the Trinity of open source at previous SaltConf conferences. And those recordings are available on our YouTube channel.
One question I'm going to throw out there, Tom, before we move on. I know for myself, along probably with our guests that are listening in, there's this misnomer, right, in the industry that companies make money off of open source. And when we look a little deeper, right, that's not the case. And I know you've talked about this a little bit. Maybe for our guests here, maybe cover the difference of really where that revenue or that profit's coming from, and again how, from a SaltStack perspective and within VMware, we're kind of approaching that.
So for any piece of open source software to be maintained long term, especially when that software becomes larger, if that software becomes large enough that it cannot be maintained by either a handful of volunteers, it has to be tied into revenue streams somehow. And there's a number of different ways in which that can happen. But this is a really important thing to understand, because the overhead that you give a project also dictates the type and depth of the revenue that is required. If we look at a project like a text editor, like Vim, for instance, the overhead that they have is very small. And so the profitability doesn't have to be as high either. But we look at a project like Salt Project, the overhead is pretty significant to maintain a platform of this size. We have to have an answer to profitability, especially when we tie that into the liability of the fact that we've raised money, and that VMware, of course, paid a significant amount of money to acquire SaltStack, the company. And so when we do that, again, we have to understand that you must tie that open source development back to revenue somehow, or else the long-term maintainership of that project is compromised, again, especially if that project has significant scale. And so what we end up looking at inside of VMware and with the Trinity of open source is understanding that the open source development needs to be something that can be utilized to drive the development and growth of proprietary products, and that those proprietary products need to target the needs of someone who is not satisfied or satiated completely with what is in the open source software. And so that means that we need to create, in the case of Salt Project, peripheral pieces of software, which we can sell, which are bolstered by the community, but in turn can bolster the community. And only through that symbiotic relationship are we able to create something which can be truly maintained long term. Does that answer your question, Nick?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks, Tom.
All right, now I'm going to hand off to Nick here in a minute, but I also want to talk about when SaltStack was acquired by VMware. So SaltStack was acquired by VMware back in October of 2020. And this is something that I was personally very excited about and that I pushed very hard for. I understood that a couple of major things were happening in the industry as a whole. I understood that the mechanisms for the profitability of open source were going to change, which we have seen change, not only over the last few years, but especially over the last 12 months. And I understood that for Salt Project to continue to grow and be strong, it would make sense for it to go into and be absorbed by a company like VMware. The stewardship of the Salt Project is something which has been taken very seriously inside of VMware. And this is something I'm very proud to be able to say, even to almost 3 years into this acquisition, that VMware has been an excellent and fantastic steward of the Salt project. Have we had some bumps in the road? Of course we have. It's impossible not to. But again, that's one of the big reasons why I'm here, is to make sure that those things can be smoothed out and that the project that I founded over 12 years ago can still be healthy and thrive inside of a larger company like VMware. And as many people are aware, soon Broadcom, which again is why I'm excited to maintain my position here inside of VMware and in Broadcom to continue pushing Salt Project forward and ensuring that it's in a position that it drives revenue for VMware while delivering significant value as an open source project that is Apache licensed. Now, Nick spends a lot of time in the nuts and bolts of the individual projects that we work with here inside of VMware. And so I want to hand the time over to him so that he can talk about where we are with some of these projects, as well as the growth of some of these products and what we're looking at next from a product perspective. Nick, take
Thanks,
it
Tom.
away.
Yep. So we'll cover this real quickly. We'll leave this slide up, Tom, and just so everyone understands, if they haven't been with us on this journey, right? So from an open source perspective, we have Salt Project. From the enterprise side, it was previously SaltStack Enterprise, which then became part of the vRealize family as SaltStack Config, and then just a little over a year ago, with the rebranding from vRealize to VMware ARIA Automation, it is now part of the automation stack even more heavily as config. And so again, to echo kind of what Tom has said, this has been part of that heavy investment and that heavy value that VMware acknowledged, not only in open source with Salt Project, but from an enterprise perspective. And it really, for a long time, wound up answering the question that a lot of clients had, which is, what is VMware's position or point of view on configuration management when it came to automation? And so while there was other alternatives out there, and from a vRealize or an ARIA automation perspective, we certainly want to make sure that our clients are satisfied with the tools and solutions they're using, because we know there's lots of them out there. It was a opportunity for us within VMware to take a stance and provide a solution that we could offer to our clients when they said, well, what do you recommend? And from all the points that Tom covered earlier, scalability, flexibility, growth, right? And what I have always been impressed with Salt is While a solution may not exist to solve every problem, it is probably just a module or a quick solution away. And that's a great testament, I think, to the work that Tom, the community, and the core team have done to really think about something knowing that you're not going to be able to solve all your problems, because half your problems you're not even going to know about in 5, 10, 15 years later as the industry evolves and changes, as we've seen in just the last 12 to 24 months. The adaptability is what's important, right? And I think change is inevitable. So Salt Project really embraces that. And that's also, when we look at the broader sense from an enterprise perspective, what we're trying to do. So with that, let's segue into the next slide, Tom. And I just want to cover off on this. So, referring to this kind of as balance, right? That mixture and that chemistry between the balance of open source and enterprise, profitability, investment, and people being able to secure the solutions they're using and feeling protected, whether it be through their own ability to support open source projects and solutions, balanced with that enterprise scale support that customers are used to, like from VMware. So it's a fine balance that we're always trying to throttle between. But I will say, and hopefully you will all agree with the next couple of slides, what we've been doing since the acquisition almost 3 years ago. There's a lot of great things that we are very excited to announce that are already part of open source that I will cover, and some stuff that's really quickly approaching on the horizon for taking some of that as well as the core of Salt and bringing it into the enterprise. Let's go on, Tom. So the first item that I want to talk about that's available is this idea of Salt extensions, right? Tom talked about the modularity and the framework of Salt. And so over the years, like any good project and any good steward of any project, we really took a look back, and this is a credit to the engineering team to really say, how can we make Salt at its core lighter in terms of there's extensions and content in there that maybe not the majority of the community or initial users will need. So we are really looking at driving forward with extensions. So while there's still some capabilities that are part of Salt core today, what we're trying to do is get it down to essentially those core components and then let clients and users have that flexibility to bring those pieces in as they need. So it's a little bit more compact, a little bit more light than what it already is today, and let clients drive with the functionality they need and not just force everything upon them. The second piece I'd like to cover is Salt Analytics, right? With a lot of data processing going on today and a lot of talk around, edge devices, Salt Analytics capitalizes on Salt's framework as well as any clients that are already using it and processing that data at the edge so that you can send back the minimal viable. So when we think about, as Tom mentioned with CMDBs, right, data becomes stale, right? Sometimes as the world expands, we still have to remember that there's areas of the world where businesses and individuals operate where they don't have a big pipe, right? They're not able to always collect the amount of data that they want, but we can give them a way to maybe do these intermittent collections and then maybe full collections. So this really gives full control using Salt to pull in that data and have a really better understanding of your infrastructure and the current health and state of it. Thirdly, Salt Describe. So one of the things in talking to clients, open source, enterprise, the feedback we got was, hey, love Salt, love the flexibility, the versatility, scale, but we're invested in an existing product, whatever that product may be. And so Salt Describe really first and foremost was targeted as being able to look at an existing environment. So let's take a Linux OS with a bunch of installed packages, users, etc., and be able to reverse engineer into a Salt state file a file that then clients could then start to edit. Right? I always find it's easier to start with a canvas that's been painted on a little and go from there and modify than it is to start with a blank Vim editor and then good luck trying to learn a new stack. And while Salt is extremely friendly and easy to learn, the reality is we're dealing in enterprises and large environments where time is precious, and we know that people's and resources are few. And then lastly, and probably one of the most exciting ones, right? For anyone that does know Salt, right? We have our minions, we have our agents, which gives great versatility, and we have Salt SSH. Trying to find some balance in between to be agentless and still be completely salty has been something that Tom was even working on prior to acquisition. And I'm happy to announce that, the last few months, we officially released Heist, which essentially gives us the full salty capabilities of doing everything you know and love today with Salt, but in an agentless manner. So whether it be because you're dealing with security concerns, particular environments where you're not able to install and leave an agent running, whatever that use case is, this now really expands the capability of Salt beyond for those users that also want to be able to use Salt, but we're always a little bit limited because of the agent requirements. So those are the four big investments that VMware and the Salt core team have been making. There's others that are in the works, and in a future Salty stream, we certainly will go into those. But I just wanted to show again this balance between the investment of open source and then capitalizing on that and bringing that to enterprise proprietary products that our clients get value out of so they don't have to go build these solutions and maintain them for themselves. If we move on here, I want to show you about a plan that's come together, and it's really been a labor of love for myself and a number of other folks within VMware and Salt, and even the broader product and engineering teams within VMware. So we've had this notion where we've declared Salt everywhere. This notion of how can Salt improve VMware and the products that we make and the client experience in using it and making it as simple as possible, especially when we start to look at our large enterprise customers, where let's just face it, in this day and age where technology sprawl is everywhere and resources are more limited and time and expectations to deliver are just ratcheting up day after day. We wanted to look at a better way that balanced open source and enterprise and looking at the vision that VMware initially had and even going further into Broadcom and the future of what the VMware product stack looks like to be able to improve, right? I know a lot of people think or may have this assumption of why Tom named it Salt. And I asked him one day when I first started, and his answer was brilliant, right? He named Salt Salt because Salt always makes things just that much better, right? And so we like to say we're saltifying VMware and specifically the VMware cloud. So the second thing we've also done and that we're in the process of doing is integrating those salt minions within the SDDC appliances. For those of you that are not familiar, to keep those acronyms understood, SDDC stands for Software Defined Data Center. It's what we affectionately call VMware Cloud. It's traditionally the number one private cloud out there that clients are running if you're not also consuming public cloud. And so this is, again, another way to saltify the VMware Cloud Stack, providing out of the box capabilities that customers can manage, whether it be a small single vCenter deployment or multiple VMware Cloud Foundations or VCF stacks, and doing it in a way without having to grow your IT team and manage it at very high number of deployments while getting the benefits of that and lowering the overall cost of operating those environments. Third, um, along with that, our commitment is to, as part of the product, ship the SALT modules. They will be part of extension modules, as I mentioned earlier. So for the various products, whether it be ARIA, the SDC Manager, vCenter, vSphere, etc. We will be providing modules as part of the product. So this is not something that you, the client, will have to, or in the open source community, have to go invest in directly. We certainly want you to contribute and expand upon those, but it is something that will be out of the box for you with the products that you're consuming from VMware. And then lastly, because we have solutions within VMware like VMware verified designs and solutions, we are going to put those into VMware, or excuse me, into salt state files. So again, if you're looking for the optimal desired state of what a configuration for any particular product. Those reference date files will be provided. You certainly can modify those, but we're hoping that it answers the age-old question of what is VMware defined as good, and then recognizing that there needs to be flexibility in some of the very um, you know various edge cases and use cases that our clients find ourselves in, where they're pushing the boundaries of our technologies and others. And so, just to give you an overview picture of what this means going forward, is at every part of the software defined data center, SALT will be there. And we're specifically talking about SALT project and open. Yes, we'll continue to have ARIA automation config and certainly have the capabilities at the enterprise level. But what we wanted to do is deliver value out of the box that unified the software defined data center. As you saw earlier from what Tom spoke about, make it easy to extend, whether it be using other products within the VMware stack or other solutions that you have running your infrastructure that are essential to IT operations, that make you easier to fuse the stack together. Third, it's automated, right? So today we're trying to look for economies of scale, automate everything. And so with SALT, you can automate it. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, the sustainability of reducing the overall cost of the VMware cloud and being able to operate more efficiently, but at much larger scales than thought previously. So that's what I have. Tom, I think we can open it up for some Q&A.
Right. If anyone has some questions, you're more than welcome to leave them in the comments section. And if we don't have any questions, which would also be fine, we can go ahead and wrap up. So as we go ahead and wrap up this the first Salty Stream, we're planning on bringing out more of these as time goes on, but we're very, very excited, as always, to be able to continually present on what SALT is, where it's going, and how it's being adopted and utilized not only inside of VMware, but also outside. We hope to be able to bring in community members and developers and talk about some of the new features that we're working on, as well as people inside of VMware to talk about how we are moving things forward from an overall SALT perspective, both inside of VMware and as well as inside of SALT project. So again, thank you all for coming. Thanks you all for listening, and hopefully you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.